Have you ever felt fear clawing at your chest before you even realize what's coming? That's how it began for Dr. Eli Harper. The Arctic night offered no mercy, just black seas, ice plains that stretched beyond sight, and a silence so complete it pressed against your eardrums. Yet beneath that crushing quiet, a signal pulsed, a whisper of something that shouldn't exist. It was October 3rd, 1975. The seas off northern Alaska were already turning cold enough to kill in minutes. Dr. Harper stood on the deck of the small charter vessel Arctic Dawn, binoculars trained on specks of grey on the horizon. His breath misted in the air as he listened to the radio crackle. He was chasing a myth. Rumors of the SS Baychimo, the so-called ghost ship abandoned in 1931 and many times reported adrift ever since. Few believed, fewer dared chase phantoms. Then the fog rolled in, advancing like a silent tsunami. The Arctic Dawn slowed. Harper signaled the crew. There, just visible now, a hulking shape emerging from the whiteness. The Baychimo. First glimpse, rust-streaked hull, torn tarps flapping like dead wings, a silhouette of masts, taller than memory, cresting the ice-choked waves. No lights, no movement, only that hollow shape drifting aimlessly. It resembled a corpse bobbing at sea, waiting to be claimed. "Ready the boarding ladder," he ordered. Clive, the crew's radio operator, hesitated. "Doc, there might be survivors, or something worse." Harper only nodded. His obsession had hardened his nerves. If this ship was real, he would find answers. They climbed aboard in near silence. Ice crunched underfoot. The smell hit first, stale, salty, a whisper of decay. Nothing alive on deck. No birds, no wind. The metal groaned as if settling. Harper's pulse throbbed in his ears. He raised his flashlight, but the beam faltered, flickering against impossible patches of darkness that swallowed its light. A door to the main hold stood half open, its hinges rusted but ajar. Harper's team froze. A single, blood-red wrench lay on the deck beside it, unexpected, out of place. He picked it up, fingerprints etched in grime, deeper than shocking, fresh. He turned, searching the shadowed corridors below deck. Footsteps echoed, yet no one moved. His heart pounded. A whisper, soft as falling snow. "Don't leave." Clive bolted upright, pale. "Did you hear it?" he whispered. Harper nodded, pocketing the wrench. Something unimaginable had survived or come aboard. In that cavernous belly of a ship lost to time, the team made their first mistake. They split up, Harper and Clive toward the captain's quarters, Marta and Petrov to inspect cargo holds. Nuka, the Inuit tracker, stayed by the ladder, watching the horizon. She glanced sideways at the fog, her breath shallow. Something flickered in the mist behind her, a figure, a shifting shade. She blinked. Nothing. Harper pushed open the captain's quarters. Inside, dust coated everything. Papers strewn, a logbook resting open on the desk. The last entry was dated May 15th, 1931. It read, "Ice speaks. Crew mutters in the dark. I fear I'm losing them all." Beneath the entry, scribbled later in a darker ink, "They whisper still." A low moan vibrated through the room's timbers. Clive jumped, flashlight swinging. The beam caught something impossible. Footprints in dust, new footprints, leading away into the narrow hallway. Neither of them had come down here. Neither of them had walked on this deck before. "Clive," Harper murmured. "We're not alone." The fog outside pressed, the lights of the ship's lanterns groaning, swinging though there was no breeze. Suddenly, a scream tore from the lower decks, the kind that rips sanity in two. Marta's voice, then silence so swift it hurt. Harper raced forward. Clive hesitated, his face pasty and ghostlight. "Go!" Harper hissed. They ran, each step echoing. Something waited. The scream died as suddenly as it began, swallowed by the endless corridors of steel and ice. Dr. Harper and Clive reached the cargo hold entrance, their breath ragged and white in the air. The massive door stood ajar, darkness pouring out like a wound. Harper hesitated just long enough to feel the temperature drop, drastically, too cold for human lungs, too still. "Marta!" he called, voice wavering. No reply, just a faint drip, drip, drip. They entered. The beam of Harper's flashlight barely cut through the gloom. Dust and ice clung to crates marked with faded Soviet symbols. Empty chains swung slowly from the ceiling, their clinks unnaturally soft. On the far side, something moved, quick, silent, a flicker of color. They rushed forward. Only Marta's scarf lay on the ground. No blood, no sign of a struggle. Her flashlight rested beside it, still on, but the beam pointed directly at the wall and smeared across the rusted steel. In something thick and black were 4 words. "We hear you thinking." Clive staggered back, muttering prayers. Harper stared at the phrase. It hadn't been written in English. It was in Inuktitut. He turned. "Nuka?" No answer. On deck, Nuka had been keeping watch, eyes fixed on the sea. But now she was gone. Her boots were still there, placed side by side neatly, as if removed with intention. No footprints led away, just a circle of melted frost where she had stood. And her pendant, an ivory carving of Sedna, the sea goddess, lay cracked at Harper's feet. Clive found him minutes later, holding the broken charm. "She's gone," Harper whispered. "No, no, no, no," Clive muttered. "This is wrong. We shouldn't be here." He looked up, face drenched in panic. "It's not just a ghost ship. This thing's alive." A groan echoed from deep within the hull. This time the sound carried shape, a layered distortion, like several voices speaking at once. Male, female, children, merging into something ancient and unreadable. Then the whisper returned. Not through the radio, not from a person, inside their heads. "Turn back, or drown in the dreaming ice." Clive dropped the radio and ran. Harper chased him but slipped, falling hard, cracking his shoulder against the metal grating. He gasped in pain, his breath billowing like steam. The cold had intensified again. Snow now flurried inside the ship. He rose slowly, alone. Ahead, the ship's inner corridors had changed. What had been a single passage now twisted into 2, then 3. The architecture warped subtly. Angles didn't align, doors tilted at impossible slants. The ship's layout no longer matched the blueprints he had memorized. A hallucination. Harper tried to retrace his steps, but the corridor looped. Every turn led back to the same bulkhead, one marked with the number 38 over and over. But the Baychimo had only 27 numbered sections. He finally kicked open a side door and emerged into the ship's mess hall. Empty, tables overturned, trays still holding rusted utensils. But the center of the room had been cleared, tables pushed aside, forming a circle. In the middle sat an object Harper hadn't seen before, a brass phonograph, untouched by rust. The record on it spun slowly, no sound. A needle hovered, never quite touching. Harper, half crazed with curiosity, turned the crank. The needle dropped. A lullaby began, soft, off-key. A woman's voice in some forgotten dialect, sweet at first, then strained, painful. The melody slowed, warbled, reversed, and behind the sound came weeping from inside the phonograph. Harper lunged, knocking it over. The sound stopped, but the feeling didn't. He turned. A shadow stood in the doorway, Marta. Her eyes were black, no irises. Her mouth opened, but no sound came, just blood dripping slowly from her ears. Her hands twitched in an unnatural rhythm. Harper stepped back, knowing instinctively that wasn't Marta anymore. She whispered something, then vanished. Clive found him minutes later, sobbing. Together they stumbled toward the upper deck, only to find the door welded shut. They were being herded, not by hands, but by will, a will buried deep in the ship's metal bones. Clive radioed their vessel. No response, only static. Then buried in that noise, a phrase repeated endlessly, warped and slow. It's not the ship, it's what's inside. Below them, something knocked from under the floor. 3 times. There are places in the world where reality grows thin, where memory distorts, time folds in on itself, and fear becomes physical. Deep within the Baychimo, Dr. Harper began to understand. They weren't just trapped on a ship. They were inside something older than steel, older than ice, something that had been waiting. They spent the night huddled in the infirmary, surrounded by rusted gurneys and cracked cabinets. Clive wouldn't speak, his eyes fixed on a blank wall, unblinking. Harper sat across from him, reading the fragments of a torn medical ledger. Entries dated October 1931. The doctor had catalogued symptoms among the crew: hallucinations, sleepwalking, self-mutilation. One line stood out, circled in red ink. They begin to dream with open eyes, and beneath it, hastily scribbled in the margins, the vessel is not drifting. It is returning. That night, Clive screamed in his sleep. Harper shook him awake, but Clive's gaze was glassy, pupils dilated. "She's in the water," he muttered, "calling us home." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a photo, aged, curling at the edges, a woman and child standing beside a lighthouse. "My wife," he whispered. "She died last winter, but I saw her, Eli. I heard her singing to me through the radio. She said she's waiting in the lower hold." Harper froze. "You never told me you were married." Clive blinked. Confusion flickered. "Didn't I?" He hadn't. In fact, Harper remembered Clive saying he lived alone. Something was wrong. Not just with the ship, but with them. The next morning, they searched for Petrov. All they found were wet footprints leading from the engine room into the ship's cold storage. Inside, stacked neatly in the center of the room, were diving gear pieces, helmet, gloves, and boots, each filled with seawater still steaming in the cold. And on the wall, another message, this one scratched deep into the frost-covered metal. "We are the wreckage." They moved toward the lower decks, compelled by dread more than logic. As they descended the final rusted stairwell, something changed. The air grew thick, syrupy, humming faintly. The metal walls sweated. Shadows moved without light to cast them. And time began to stutter. Clive checked his watch. The second hand spun backwards. At the bottom, they entered the cargo belly of the Baychimo. What they found defied explanation. It was not a room, it was a chamber. A massive circular hollow carved out from the ship's interior, lined with symbols not etched, but grown into the walls, pulsing faintly like veins. At the center was a structure, jagged and organic, not ice, not metal, something in between, something alive. Suspended above it, floating midair, was Nuka, eyes closed, mouth open, whispers spilled from her lips, not in her voice, but voices, dozens, hundreds, layered like a chorus. They spoke in tongues Harper could almost understand, fragments that slipped through comprehension like water through fingers. Clive dropped to his knees. "It's her," he whispered. "My wife. She's in there. She said I can join her." "Clive, that's not your wife," Harper hissed. "That's not anything human." But Clive didn't hear him. He stood, stepped forward, and reached into the pulsing structure. A scream, pure, inhuman, ripped through the air. The structure reacted, absorbing Clive like oil into water. For one horrifying moment, Harper saw him inside, face twisted in blissful agony, eyes staring straight through reality. Then he was gone. The whispers stopped. The chamber fell still. Harper staggered back, choking. Something in his mind broke. The ship groaned, metal bones shifting. The hull vibrated with a rhythm, like a heartbeat. He fled. Corridors twisted around him. The layout changed as he ran. Every turn led him back to the same room, the captain's quarters. On the desk now sat a new logbook, leather-bound, wet to the touch. Inside, pages of handwriting, his handwriting, dated tomorrow. Each entry detailed everything he had just experienced. But the final page was blank, except for one line, "You're almost ready." Behind him, the door creaked open. Harper turned, expecting a ghost. Instead, it was himself, older, eyes black, smiling. "Time folds differently here," the reflection said. "You've been here before. You never left." The lights flickered. The phonograph began playing upstairs, the lullaby. But this time, it played backwards. And beneath the melody, a knock, 4 times. Dr. Harper didn't remember how he had left the lower deck. The last clear image in his mind was the sound of his own voice, but not his, echoing through the corridor like a memory of a future that had no right to exist. Now somehow he was back in the infirmary, drenched in sweat, shaking violently despite the room's frigid air, cold enough to preserve the dead. Around him, the instruments had shifted positions. The photograph on the wall, once a calm sailing vessel on gentle seas, now depicted the Baychimo, caught in a vortex of storm and ice, and within the frozen waves behind her were faces. Dozens, all eyes open, all pupils gone, all watching. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to breathe, to think. He remembered something Nuka had said before they boarded. Some things are too old to die, and they remember. At the time, he had dismissed it as folklore, another Inuit myth meant to frighten outsiders. But now, it didn't feel like myth. The Baychimo wasn't just iron and salt-stained hulls. It was a memory engine, a living fossil, a container for something older than steel and ice. It had merged with something alien, something beneath the surface of time. Thirst tore through him. He found a sealed water bottle in a cabinet, cracked the cap, and drank. But it wasn't water. It was brine. Thick, warm, ancient. He gagged, spat it out. A solid object clinked onto the floor. A brass naval button, remarkably polished, inscribed HMS Erebus. He recognized it immediately. The Erebus was one of the 2 Franklin expedition ships that vanished in 1845, presumed lost to the Arctic. How in God's name was it here? Then the radio whined to life, static first. Then a woman's voice, singing slowly, mournfully. A dirge. Interlaced with the melody was the dragging sound of chains scraping over metal. Hypnotized, Harper followed the sound, staggering upward through a corridor that hadn't existed earlier. The door he passed through was new. He stepped into the ship's navigation room, and everything felt wrong. Covering the back wall was a massive map, not made of paper, but of skin. Human, tanned and stretched, etched with ink that mapped forgotten shipping routes, converging toward a single point in the Arctic. That point was marked with a symbol. A circle, split by a spiral. Beneath it, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, was a single phrase, "Anchor of the world." He didn't know how he knew, but that was where the ship was going, or perhaps where it had always been returning. In the center of the room, atop a rotted pedestal, sat a modern military radio. Portable. Not from the 1930s, no power cables, it was on. The display showed a countdown, 1947-03, a red timer ticking backward. The voice returned now in English. His voice. "Dr. Harper, you are almost ready. One more layer to peel." Harper screamed, smashing the radio against the wall. It didn't break. Instead, it emitted a rising tone, sharp, high, drilling into his skull like a blade of sound. He dropped to his knees, ears ringing, hands over his head. Then silence. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't alone. Standing at the threshold was himself, not older this time, perfected. Crisp naval uniform, pitch black eyes, a neutral face, expressionless as though it had been scraped clean of doubt. "You understand now, don't you?" the figure said, voice even, cold. "This ship doesn't carry passengers, it becomes them. Every man who vanished, every mad whisper, every hallucination. They're not ghosts. They're versions, fragments, reflections sewn into the steel. Harper trembled. The truth had nested inside him now. He felt it. He was an echo, a splinter of something endlessly repeating, each cycle more corrupt. But there was a way out, or at least a choice. "There's something in the core," the figure said. "It sees us through time. It needs us to remember it. But if you reach it, maybe you can end the loop." The reflection faded. The radio sparked violently. The ship moaned, a sound deep and animal, bones of steel shifting. Harper ran. Corridors mutated as he moved. Lights stuttered in rhythmic bursts. Shadows moved without origin. He reached the cargo bay, but the floor was gone. A vast chasm yawned where metal once was. In its center was a staircase, ancient, stone, slick with condensation, descending straight into darkness, into the heart of the Baychimo, or whatever had taken her. He didn't hesitate. He descended. The staircase descended far deeper than the dimensions of the ship should have allowed. Each step down was a breath drawn into lungs that no longer wanted air. The stone beneath Harper's feet was slick with a thin film of something organic, neither moss nor mold, but rather a viscous secretion that glowed faintly in the dark like bioluminescent veins. The walls had changed too, no longer steel, not ice. They pulsed with a slow rhythm as though the Baychimo were not just alive, but dreaming. Harper descended for what felt like hours. Time melted. His watch stopped ticking. Gravity grew inconsistent. His weight seemed to lift and fall in waves. He began to hear things. First, the lullaby again, warped and slowed. Then the voices, Clive, Marta, Petrov, all whispering fragments of thought he'd never known they had. "We never left. It's inside us. She sings in the silence." When the staircase finally ended, he emerged into a vast chamber. The ceiling stretched beyond visibility, lost in a void, speckled with pinpricks of pale blue light, stars, or perhaps eyes. The floor beneath him was smooth, black, and warm to the touch. It vibrated faintly, responding to his presence. At the center of the chamber stood a monument. It resembled a tree, if a tree were forged from the fused bones of shipwrecks and human spines, twisted together into a column that reached upward endlessly. Its branches were cables and chains. Its roots, half buried in a pool of brackish fluid, pulsed in rhythm with the ship's creaks. From the roots, thousands of thin, transparent filaments extended outward, each one connecting to faces, floating inside the fluid, their mouths open in silent screams. He stepped forward, entranced, and the tree opened its eyes. Not in the literal sense. There were no pupils, no lids, but he felt it, a shift in the air, a gaze. It was watching him, recognizing him, measuring him. And then it spoke, not in sound but in overwhelming sensation, in a memory not his own. He was back on the ice. October 1931, the original Baychimo crew, panic, madness. The ice had shifted, trapping them. The captain ordered evacuation, but some refused. They had seen things, heard things. Below the ice, something ancient had called out, and they had answered. He saw a sailor standing alone on the deck, carving symbols into his arms, another weeping as he whispered to the sea. He saw one man lower a black box into the water, and that was the moment. That was when it entered the ship. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't even alive in the traditional sense. It was a resonance, a survivor of something older than biology, an idea trapped in matter. A consciousness without form, desperate to preserve itself through memory, through us. It had latched onto the Baychimo when the sailor dropped that box, a totem of connection, and from there it began to digest. Crew, time, identity. Now, through Harper, it showed him the future. Countless vessels across history vanished in calm seas, in cold fog. all connected, all branches, the Mary Celeste, the Octavius, even the Erebus and Terror. All were touched by this thing, this parasite of perception, and it had learned. It needed a vessel that could move between times, that could carry its seed into the future. It chose him. "You are the cartographer," the voice said inside him. "You remember, you record, you retell." Harper fell to his knees, his mind flooded with memories not his own. He saw himself living in the 19th century, then in the 22nd, saw versions of himself writing journals, recording logs, warning no one, over and over, across ages, across timelines. He was the ship's chronicler, the infections archivist. The voice whispered, "Say it, accept it, become." But then something broke through, a sound, tiny, familiar, the tinkling of Nuka's ivory pendant. He looked down and saw it lying in the black water at his knees, unbroken, not cracked, never cracked. She had dropped it deliberately, a marker, a seed of clarity. He clutched it. The visions stopped, the pressure eased, the resonance faltered. Something in the tree shrieked, not with sound, but with absence, a vacuum of presence. It had underestimated him. Harper stood. The thing lunged, not physically but with memory. It tried to rewrite his past, flood him with false images, make him forget why he had come. He clutched the pendant tighter, and he remembered. He was not an echo, not yet. And he could end it. Dr. Harper stood in the black chamber, soaked in sweat and sea brine, the ivory pendant burning in his palm like a brand. The living monument before him pulsed erratically now, its filaments recoiling, its voice stuttering inside his skull. It was wounded, disoriented, but not defeated. He stepped closer. The Baychimo groaned from every deck, every rivet straining under a soundless pressure, like the ship itself was being torn between this moment and another. Two timelines collapsing into one. The ceiling above no longer resembled any human construction. It had become sky, starless, depthless, a void pressing downward. He reached the tree. The faces in the fluid opened their eyes, and each one, Marta, Petrov, Clive, Nuka himself, began to mouth the same phrase. What is remembered? Lives. But Harper now understood something the entity didn't. Memory doesn't just preserve, it decays. He pulled the pendant apart, the ivory splitting cleanly in his hands, revealing something hidden inside, a sliver of glacial obsidian, sharp as glass. Nuka had hidden it there. It was a weapon of belief, carved from ice that had never melted in over 20,000 years. A shard from the first cold, the oldest thing still untouched by time. The thing screamed, not with sound, but with the sudden awareness of its own fragility. Harper stabbed the shard into the base of the root. The monument convulsed. The room imploded outward. Time ruptured, and for one blinding instant, Harper saw everything. The Baychimo through every iteration, crewless, adrift, appearing again and again, not by coincidence, but by design. He saw the entity inside it laying seeds in other vessels, other times. But most horrifying of all, he saw himself. Hundreds of him, standing on decks, scribbling in logbooks, speaking warnings into radios that would never be received. He wasn't the first Harper, he was the latest, and perhaps not even real. The chamber collapsed. Water flooded in, though it wasn't water anymore. It was memory turned liquid, thought turned physical. As the ship was torn apart around him, Harper clung to the one truth he had left. He could still choose. With his final breath, he spoke the phrase the entity feared most, "Let me forget," and the Baychimo answered. The wreck was discovered 3 weeks later by a Canadian icebreaker. There were no bodies, no distress calls. But in the captain's quarters, a single leather-bound journal was found, pages blank, save for the last. One sentence. The ship remembers, but now I do not. The journal was turned over to authorities, disappeared in transit. Years later, a marine biologist named Dr. Eli Harper, Eli's niece, was sorting through her uncle's old research when she received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph of a ship, frozen in ice, and on the back, a single line. I found her again, but this time, she remembered me first.